Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture, and this is going to be a big one. Today we're going to be talking about the newest major label project from Brockhampton, Iridescence. This was always going to be the biggest test for Brockhampton going forward. Sure, putting out 3 overstuffed albums in a year was impressive as all hell, and turned a small internet collective into a festival monster, but when you surge that quickly to that point and land a major label deal as a result, and lose one of your key members along the way amidst a flurry of ugly allegations, yeah, I won't lie. Even though I would never claim to be a full-fledged fan of Brockhampton in comparison with their diehard following that nearly crushed me in the pit when I saw them at Reading Festival this year, I was concerned about this. The collective was bursting forth with so many compelling ideas about pushing hip-hop forward as an experimental genre and art form that I didn't want to see them ground up in the meat grinder of the mainstream music industry, and for a while, I was worried that Amir's departure would compromise their group dynamic. Now, thankfully, it seemed like I was wrong in a big way, at least live, as the old songs still banged hard, and the boy band managed to pull together an album for this year that had every fan salivating at the possibilities, especially as this could be the beginning of a new trilogy. And hell, I'll admit I was kind of excited for this too. At the very least, a major label budget would give them expanded sampling clearances and fanfare that for their online following they would never need, but could potentially get them a slice of mainstream crossover, or maybe even radio play. Hell, in my mind, that'd be the only reason that Brockhampton would sign to a major label in the first place, but at the same time, Iridescence would have to be really good to stick the landing, despite the change in album title every other week, because it's Brockhampton, you expect it. So alright, how's the album? Well, I will say this. Of the albums that Brockhampton has released thus far, I could put money on Iridescence being their most polarizing. And I mean specifically among some of the die-hard fans who know the Saturation trilogy inside and out, and will recognize the differences in sound, style, and sequencing almost immediately. Because if you're in that particular group, Iridescence might feel off. Plain and simple. It almost seems like the guys recognized that some critics, including myself, called their formula by the second and third Saturation albums, because you know they were paying attention, especially to online critics, and they were looking to throw a curveball at that audience, all the while dealing with a change in lineup, a new major label, and a very different recording environment, with the majority of this album being recorded very quickly at Abbey Road Studios in London, with more than a few passing glances taken at Radiohead, Oasis, and the Beatles. You know, that other big boy band that was far more than they appeared at first and wound up being so much more experimental within their genre. And the more you start noticing some of those details, and the fact that this record doesn't quite have the same instant gratification as all the Saturation releases did before, you know what, I might be in the minority, but I might like this one the most out of all of them. And that's an uphill battle for me to explain because, again, this is not that far removed from the other Saturation projects, and what many would perceive as the flaws are that much more on display. For one, the sequencing is off kilter in the extreme, with a pivot to softer material right after the opening song New Orleans, breaking up the expected string of bangers that typically open up Brockhampton projects. And more to the point, there just aren't as many hit-ready bangers in the same way there were on the first 3 Saturation albums. Oh, the southern influence is still prominent, but when we aren't getting production that probably owes more to Death Grips than Manny Fresh, we'll come back to that, we're seeing more elegant strings and delicate electronics and grooves that clearly shows the boy band taking advantage of that major label budget. And if you're looking for the homegrown, streamlined production that characterized so much of the Saturation albums with some very knowing imperfections and could balance genre shifts with remarkable precision and really a lot of flow, well, this album draws more attention to the cracks all the more vividly. And if you weren't sold on the wild pitch shifting, the auto-tune, the out-of-nowhere Oasis X segments with Bareface, who is much more prominently featured here, well, Iridescence is moving all that to the forefront. And even for fans, I can see this as being more jarring and less accessible. And you can tell that minus Amir, there's a certain edge and stentorian presence that Brockhampton just doesn't quite have in the same way anymore, even if Dom and Joba are picking up a lot of the slack. But here's the thing. The more listens I gave to Iridescence, the more I was convinced of two contradicting feelings about it. That it's easily their most polished album to date, but also that the jarring moments, they're more absolutely intentional. Likely a factor of the boy band recording this halfway around the world outside of their own inner compound, and then having to deal with some very uncomfortable issues, distinct to each member. Sure, none of them are remotely trusting of the major label that they signed to. That's likely the biggest reason behind that loophole, a sampled conversation between DJ WooKid and Cameron about how the artist lost so much of his royalties and publishing and the headlong rush to radio success just not knowing any better. That's why that interlude is on the album, but delve deeper and each member has their own distinctive insecurities. Merlin worries that despite the success they're getting now, that the hustle will hit a very abrupt end. He's very much aware that his fame, which his family already disapproves of, has a time limit. And Kevin Abstract sees fame for all the wrong reasons coming, with the media only focusing on the controversies and not the artistic achievements the band has, some of which he's concerned that he's not keeping up with the rest of the boy band. And that's not to disparage him and the group's impressive humility and empathy when it comes to their brothers, but when you look at Dom, Matt, and Joba, the improvements are striking across the board, not just in the structure of their bars, but really in a lot of their content too. Matt Champion has always been the rapper in the group I've struggled with the most, even despite the improvements he's had on Saturation 3, but he takes certain very blunt acknowledgments of the party's emptiness nowadays and the open manipulation of those hanging around him to leech off the group's success in a way that Brockhampton has always somewhat kept in the subtext, particularly on Saturation 3, but now it moves straight to the text. And he's also doesn't shy away from the awkward sense of guilt that comes with questioning any of it, because they are that privileged, they got to that peak. Joba's improvements are the most obvious. Not only did he develop a double time flow while seemingly nobody was looking to compliment his singing, but he approaches a rawness in an examination of depression, substance abuse, and being on the cusp of a self-destructive break that maybe even could touch against suicide that is gripping and really quite heartbreaking. And while Dom has always been my favorite of Brockhampton as a lyricist, because I caught that nod to Aesop Rock, his openness surrounding his loneliness, self-doubt, mental health struggles, and his feelings of obligation to friends, family, and the group, it makes for powerful drama, and he really sticks the landing here. Of course, though, none of this matters if the production doesn't also step up or maintain some degree of consistency, which, let's not lie, that was a persistent issue on the Saturation trilogy, and can still somewhat be here. The blaring, shrill, near chiptune synths of New Orleans, vivid chunks of Districts and Jauvert, and that's before we get to the crushing, blown-out beat behind Berlin, especially in the outro. But you dig a little bit deeper, and the tonal choices are a bit different, as I emphasized before. I referenced Radiohead, and besides the pretty on-the-nose In Rainbow sample on tape, and similar feelings of existential angst and emptiness that have run through their entire career, and you could tell they were intending that parallel, it also sneaks through in some of the liquid guitar patches around Bareface's pieces, and the emphasis on lush classical instrumentation like on Wait, which of course shifts into a breakbeat right after the first actual intermission section. It totally makes sense, and even if it is a bit of a weird shift, there's a lot of those on this album. And at the same time, it's also no surprise that there's a sonic connection to a group like Death Grips as well. Besides some overlapping themes and a warped relationship with their audience, you get the aggressive burbling track murk of Where the Cash At, the crushing bassy warp of Jauvert, the alien choppy vocal layering of Vivid, or even the weird low-end dance groove behind Honey, except with touches of piano that are more centered in the major key. And on that subject, while Brockhampton has always had a very uncanny knack for bringing hooks that are infectious as hell, this is the first album where they have songs that are damn near anthemic, with just enough traditional refinement to put them over the top and bring that rawness to a real emotional core. You get snippets on Wade and Tonya, and District breaks down a little bit too quickly to fully embrace it, or in the case of Honey, just not get there quick enough, it's only on the outro. But then you get San Marcos, with the guitars and the keening touches that almost sound like flutes around the strings and that choir. And you know what, maybe it's just having been in the pit with Brockhampton, seeing them earlier this year, but even outside of the communal experience, they could have very easily ended the album with that song as such a powerful send-up. It really is stunningly gorgeous. But they don't. And the anthemic moment that truly struck me was on the closing song, Fabric, with the line, "You don't understand why I can't get up and shout," beneath that pulsating beat, where on an album full of confessional insecurities, sometimes you can't just ascend and scream it all to the heavens. On a song all about bigger obligations and trying to hold it all together, it's a line intended most for the audience, who might sing it for very different reasons, because they can't stand up in the same way. Another powerful example of empathy that's made Brockhampton's connection with their younger fans so damn powerful. And you know, I could come up here with a few more nitpicks, because I do wish Robert had shown up for at least one Spanish interlude. It was a quirk I've always liked, for instance. But at the end of the day, given what Brockhampton has been through in the past year, I'm genuinely stunned how great this album is. To sign to a major label, and lose a member, and not implode amidst the very real pressure that is very much apparent all across this album, it's that raw core of empathy that just holds together so powerfully, coupled with their most consistent production and groove, some of their best ever lyrics, and showing performers taking leaps and bounds in artistic growth. Yeah, you know, I'll say it. It's Brockhampton's best album to date, netting a solid 8 out of 10 from me. Absolutely a recommendation. Folks, you were out of excuses to check Brockhampton out last year, and you're long overdue now. Or to put it another way, Iridescence is fucking great. You all need to hear it. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. This album, yeah, it got to me. There are some cuts on this record that should not be missed and really did put this in the category of greatness. And I've always kind of held Brockhampton a little at arm's reach before, but yeah, they get there on this project, and I'm really happy to hear it. You want to buy or stream the record, links down there below. I got the poll up there. I know this record has polarized some Brockhampton fans, but trust me, I can imagine a lot of people coming around on this soon, so there's the poll for y'all. Tell me what you feel. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you guys want to get involved in my scheduling process or help support this channel, link to my Patreon right over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote for my schedule, and once a week for the higher tier contributors, you guys get to add albums, movies, or even a top 10 list to that schedule. If you want to see my schedules on my Instagram, link down there below. But till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.